Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Finals has a tough act to follow with what we've seen so far in the first two games. What do we expect with the series shifting to Florida and potentially big injury news for Edmonton? All that and more on Locked On NHL Game Night.
When that final horn sounds, you know it's time for Locked On NHL Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. Prepare to experience game day reactions like never before. Only on Locked On NHL Game Night. Your team every day.
Hey, hockey fans, welcome to Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thanks for making Locked On NHL Game Night your place to get a recap of the night in the NHL. We are available 7 days a week, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, an LA Kings fan on the West Coast. He is Shukri Wrights, a Boston Bruins fan on the East Coast. Together, we're here to discuss all the goals, saves, big moments, and stories from the night in the Stanley Cup Finals. However, we had another night off on Sunday, but we are getting warmed up for Game 3 coming up on Monday. And Shu, am I being greedy if I want a third straight overtime game in the Stanley Cup Finals?
No, not at all, Eddie. In fact, I'm going to double down with you right here, right now. In fact, I even tweeted this out on Friday night saying, you know what? Every game of these Stanley Cup Finals, I want to see it to go into overtime. So no, Eddie, you're not the only one. That's how good these Stanley Cup Finals have been so far. Give me another overtime game on Monday night, please. And thank you very much.
And have we ever seen that before? Well, no, we haven't seen it because we weren't alive. But it's happened once in the history of the Stanley Cup Finals where the first three games of the series went overtime. 1951, Maple Leafs versus Canadiens. And it was so long ago the Maple Leafs actually won the Stanley Cup that year. That's how long ago that it has actually been. But so far, so good. Game 1, overtime. Oilers win at 4-3. Game 2, double overtime. Panthers win at 5-4. Maybe we'll see triple overtime in game number 3. That's really being greedy. I won't even go that far.
That really is being greedy. I mean, my God.
But
what about Cam and Tyler, for God's sakes?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's their problem. That's not our problem. The other guys who host Locked On NHL Game Night. But the big story obviously has been so far in the finals, how close and competitive this series has been so far. And we've had 9 periods of hockey. We've had 16 goals scored. There have been 8 lead changes, 6 game tying goals. And the only time the series was not tied or there was a 1-goal deficit was for 1 minute and 17 seconds in the second period of game 1. Florida had a very brief 3-1 lead. Every other moment of this series so far, the game has either been tied or it's been a 1-goal margin. So, it's one thing for the games to finish overtime. Obviously, that's exciting. But there's hardly been any time in this series where it hasn't been tied or a 1-goal deficit. So you're like, if you're watching the game, you're engaged in it constantly because it's so close. It's so back and forth. One team gets the lead, one team ties it up. I mean, it's just been great, competitive, tight hockey so far. And it's even gone longer than regulation with overtime and double overtime. So, I mean, again, we've talked about it before, but if you're a fan of hockey, I don't know that you could have asked for more than what we've seen so far, but we're greedy. We want to see more.
And I don't fault you. It's like we're given desserts instead of the appetizers as an early way to tease us. And now that we've got a little taste, we want more. We want the entire entree. Give us the whole meal already, for God's sakes. And that's kind of like where I'm at with you. But the stat you pulled up, for those of you that are watching on YouTube, Eddie did a tremendous job pulling up that stat in which that 99.4% of the time since Game 7 of last year's Stanley Cup Final has the games been either been tied or has been a 1-goal deficit. If that isn't razor thin, I don't know what is. That is as razor thin as it could possibly can be. Like, you talked about how you essentially are watching every single moment of these Stanley Cup Finals games, so much so that if you turned for just a second, you actually just might miss something. you might miss something spectacular happening, whether if it's a Connor McDavid sick dangle pass to Leon Draisaitl, or whether if it's Brad Marchand on a breakaway scoring a tying goal or a go-ahead goal or whatever else. Like, that's how razor thin it has been in terms of a margin for error for both teams, which makes it for compelling hockey, which at this point in juncture, if you're a hockey fan, you have got to be more than thrilled with what you have seen through the first two games. And lastly, Eddie, I'll even take it a step further. With the games being this close, that also means the following, that Chuck Knobloch and Paul Maurice, they're playing a game of chess in real time. There's almost no time to sit and diddly-daddle like, I wonder what my next move is. By the time you're done figuring it out, the puck is in the back of your own net. That's how incredible it's been so far.
I'm sorry to do this to you, but I got to correct you because I have been so worried about saying this myself.
Uh-oh.
It's Chris Knobloch, not Chuck Knobloch, but I am
Chris
with
Knobloch.
you.
Jeez,
There's so many times I have told myself, do not say Chuck, the former second baseman for the New York Yankees and Minnesota Twins.
God.
No, it's okay. I think everyone can relate.
Chris Knobloch.
Everyone can relate to that. I'm only bringing it up because there's so many times I have almost called him Chuck as well. So don't.
I fell into it. It was like, and it wasn't a setup on your part. It was more of like, oh my gosh, a fraudulent slip. That's what all it was. Like, but for sure, Chris Knobloch. It's been a chess match. That's how razor thin it's been, man. Like it's, oh man, for sure.
And we may see Chris Knobloch, as I almost said, Chuck again. We may see Chris Knobloch be tested in game number 3 like he hasn't been so far. That's coming up when we talk about the Oilers in our next segment. But the obvious difference in game number 3 is where it's being played. Now, I thought Oilers fans set the bar pretty high with how loud and just raucous that building was. So Florida Panthers fans, will see if you can step up and meet, the gauntlet that has been laid down by the Oilers fans. Look, the Panthers are now at home. You would think that gives them a little bit extra. The crowd's there on their side, gives them maybe an extra boost. They get the second line change now. They get, the sticks are down differently than they are for faceoffs on the road than they are at home. So we'll see. But it is interesting that the Florida Panthers are only 4-3 at home this postseason. So for whatever reason, to this point, it hasn't been much of a home ice advantage so far. We'll see if that changes, though, in a couple of crucial games 3 and 4 coming up for the Panthers.
I have a very difficult time envisioning the Florida Panther fans being able to match the same level of energy, the same level of intensity, and just the sheer aura that the Edmonton Oilers fans were able to instill and as well as have at Rogers Place in Edmonton. I just have a difficult time. I'm not saying that the Emirate Arena down in Sunrise, Florida is going to sound like a church where it's just completely quiet during Sunday service. But what I am saying is that, and this is respect to the Florida Panther fans, but I just don't see that same level of energy, that same level of intensity. And I mean, I just don't. I mean, listen, you're not coming out, if you're the home team, that is Florida Panthers in this case, you're not coming out to enter Sadman. I mean, that is the most bad butt entrance there is in hockey. Come out to enter Sadman by Metallica. You're not duplicating that kind of atmosphere down in Sunrise. I just don't see it.
Well, we'll see. We'll see if they can match the intensity. It will be difficult to do because, like I said, the Oilers fans came with it strong in games 1 and 2. We have the NHL draft coming up here in Los Angeles, where I'm recording this show from, part of my show.
Yes.
And you brought up something I didn't know about the Stanley Cup Finals and a past NHL draft, the 2014 NHL draft. The top 4 picks in that draft are all playing in this Stanley Cup Final. 3 of them are on the same team. I had no idea.
Yeah. And let me tell you something. It was just really astounding to just reflect on this earlier as I was getting ready for tonight's show. But if you told me that Aaron Ekblad, Sam Reinhart, Leon Draisaitl, and Sam Bennett, while all four of them are together at the top of the stone rocky steps in Philadelphia in 2014, were going to end up playing each other in consecutive years in the Stanley Cup Finals, I would have laughed. I wouldn't have believed it back in 2014. But here we are. Those were the top 4 picks in the 2014 NHL draft, and which goes to tell you something. You just never know which player or players are not only just going to pan out, but have immense impact for their respective franchise. And you saw it back in 2014 with those 4 guys being selected, and now their impact has been clearly been felt by their respective organizations many years later in a cup final, and that's really incredible. So, speaking of the NHL draft in LA, let's see what happens with this upcoming NHL draft and what impact they may have in future cup finals. We'll see.
Yeah, and if you don't remember, like I didn't, you mentioned Ekblad went number 1 to the Panthers. Sam Reinhart went number 2 to Buffalo. Now, of course, playing for the Panthers. Leon Draisaitl, 3rd to the Oilers, and Sam Bennett was the 4th pick to the Calgary Flames. So Ekblad, Reinhart, and Bennett, 3 of the top 4 picks in 2014, all now on the Florida Panthers. Gee, I wonder why they're so good. It's amazing.
Yeah, and just real quick, you know what's crazy about the Leon Draisaitl pick? That was exactly 1 year before some guy named Connor McDavid was taken number 1 overall by Edmonton in 2015. How you like those apples?
Well, speaking of the Oilers, they could be without a key member of their team for Game 3, and we'll also check in with Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers as well. We'll do that next here on Locked On NHL Game Night. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment? It's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money. You start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check out your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, we're going to focus a little bit more on the Edmonton Oilers going into game number 3. We do have potentially significant injury news to report, as Oilers forward Ryan Nugent-Hopkins did not practice on Sunday. Oilers head coach Chris Knoblauch said that he was a game-time decision for game 3. We think it's an upper body injury. It was noted by some of the reporters in Edmonton that he was not taking faceoffs late in the game in game number 2, so that might indicate something wrong with one of his hands or his wrist or something like that. So in place of Nugent-Hopkins in practice, the Oilers had Jeff Skinner on the top line with Connor McDavid and Corey Perry. The rest of the lineup was the same, but here's the situation that might make this very tricky and might make this a challenge for Chris Knoblauch. When the Oilers go nuclear, as it's called, when they put McDavid and Draisaitl together, usually Ryan Nugent-Hopkins would drop down and play center on the second line. So will this limit the number of times maybe Knoblauch decides to go with McDavid and Draisaitl together or not? If they do that, does Adam Henrique move up from the third line and center the second line when McDavid and Draisaitl are together? It'll be very interesting to see how they're going to play this and how, if he doesn't play, and again, he's a game time decision, so he could go. But if he doesn't go, it's going to obviously affect the lineup. And now you're talking for the Oilers, 2 top 6 forwards out because Zach Hyman's already out. And now if Ryan Nugent-Hopkins can't go as well, that could be a big factor for the Edmonton Oilers going forward.
I agree. And I think that it would definitely be a significant loss if Ryan Nugent-Hopkins cannot go in game number 3. But I would even add to the point that you were just talking about moments ago in regards to Ryan Nugent-Hopkins when he is healthy in the lineup, being that second line centerman for the Oilers. And I think that is significant because it helps to go nuclear at times. You pick your spots if you're Chris Knoblauch to go nuclear, having both McDavid and Draisaitl on the same line. But if you're able to split them, you obviously have McDavid on your top line and Draisaitl on your second line, that definitely balances out your offense. But here's the kicker. If Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is not available, then I think what ends up happening is that you're going to have to potentially insert Jeff Skinner, who I think at this point can only provide a boost, and see it'll be interesting to see what he can provide offensively. But then also the question becomes like, do you keep Draisaitl on that second line and you keep McDavid on that top line? I think you do that. But I think it's going to be interesting also because of the fact that I do think that it is going to be really important to, in terms of matchups, that if Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is able to play matchups, I think is going to be really important because obviously with Florida being back home, they have the last change, and Paul Maurice is going to be able to dictate those matchups. So I do think that if the Oilers are able to have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, that would be a huge key with already not having Zach Hyman. But if for some reason he cannot go, I do think that Chris Knoblauch is going to certainly have to figure out some sort of magical combination as to how he wants to work his top six forwards.
You may have to be a little bit more selective in when he uses Draisaitl and McDavid together.
Yeah.
If Nugent-Hopkins can't go. That was not the only absence, or the only change, I should say, for the Oilers in practice on Sunday. They also apparently are going to change their defensive pairings from the first two games. Now, the first two games, they had Matthias Ekholm and Evan Bouchard together on the top pairing. Darnell Nurse and Brett Kulak was the second pairing, and Jake Wallman and John Klingberg were the third pairing. However, in practice on Sunday, Darnell Nurse had been moved up to the top pairing with Bouchard. It was Kulak and Wallman together on the second pairing, and Matthias Ekholm and John Klingberg were listed as the third pairings. I have to assume that this is a move to try and get Darnell Nurse going so far in this series, and that they don't feel like they've gotten enough from him. So they're going to put him, if they stick with this, put him on the top pairing with Evan Bouchard.
Which I think is going to be really, really key because you need Darnell Nurse to get going. But also, in terms of Evan Bouchard, when he's on the ice, he's practically like having a fourth forward. But in spirit of being an absolute nitpicker, at the risk of angering Oiler fans, I'm going to have to say this. Evan Bouchard is also a liability defensively. And unfortunately, there was a play that I think definitely played a part in costing the Oilers in game number 2. But I say this all to simply say, in terms of Knoblauch shuffling the D pairing for game number 3, I don't have a problem with it at all. I think it's actually smart because I do believe with the series shifting to Florida that the team that's going to have the upper hand in terms of matchups, dictating matchups, I think it's the Florida Panthers. So if you're Chris Knoblauch in the situation, I think it helps to be a bit proactive, maybe change up the pairing. And as you mentioned, with Darnell Nurse playing alongside with Bouchard, I think that certainly could only help. But also what I think is going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out is the continued chemistry between Brett Kulak and Jake Wallman for the third pairing and so forth, and as well as Matthias Ekholm and John Klingberg on that second pairing, how that translate for like during the game and so forth. So that's something that is going to be really like looked at heavily and potentially maybe even scrutinized by Edmonton fans and the media. But I think this is absolutely the right move, especially when you don't have the last change. And I think that absolutely is critical at this point in the series.
Let's not forget to check in with our guy, Nick Zararis. He is the host of Locked On Oilers, to get his take on what's going on with his team.
Set to take on the Florida Panthers in Game 3 Monday night. Nick Zararis of Locked On Oilers here. Big takeaway from Sunday morning's practice. The Edmonton Oilers have juggled their defensive pairs, with Darnell Nurse sliding up with Evan Bouchard, Matthias Ekholm sliding down with John Klingberg. Now, at face value, I do not like this decision one bit. Whether or not this is just a practice ploy versus something we're actually going to see in Game 3, that's a different point of conversation. But by and large, the Oilers have gotten the best defense out of Evan Bouchard in these playoffs, playing alongside Brett Kulak. When they were a pair prior to Ekholm returning from injury, they outscored opponents 6-1 at 5-on-5, which was the best of any defensive pair with at least 100 minutes through Game 5 of the Western Conference Finals. And Darnell Nurse has obviously been a lightning rod figure amongst Oiler fans for a while because of the variance within his game. He's prone to making the big mistake. He's also a player that plays difficult competition minutes, plays on the penalty kill, and has struggled particularly on that penalty kill. For the Oilers going forward, I would love if there was a world where we could see Bouchard with Kulak, Klingberg with Wallman, and then something along the lines of Nurse. And I know you're not going to take Ekholm out of the lineup for Troy Stecher, but Troy Stecher played so well alongside Darnell Nurse. So maybe there's an argument to play Ekholm with Nurse. But for the Oilers, who have played pretty well through 2 games in the Stanley Cup Final, the defense probably sticks out as being the point of improvement. For more on the Edmonton Oilers in the Stanley Cup Final, be sure to check out Locked On Oilers wherever you get your podcasts.
All right. Thanks to Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers, for checking in with that. So even though the first 2 games have obviously been, as you like to say, razor thin, it looks like Chris Knobloch is deciding to not stand pat. He feels like he needs to make some changes. We'll see about Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, but the defensive pairings will be shuffled, at least maybe to start the game. We shall see. But we could see some changes going into Game 3 for the Edmonton Oilers. Coming up next, we'll also check in with Armando Valez. He is our man, the host of Locked On Florida Panthers, to get his thoughts going into game number 3. That's next on Locked On NHL Game Night. All right, getting ready for Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Finals as the series is now shifted to Sunrise, Florida. And even though we talked about how the Panthers' record on home ice isn't that great so far this postseason, 4-3, you know they're still excited to get back home, get in front of their fans, get that home ice advantage if they can, get the fans behind them. And I will say, though, if you look at last year's final, the Panthers were 3-1 at home against the Oilers, including a Game 7 victory on home ice. So we'll see if they can continue some of that magic from Game 7 of last year in the finals to game number 3 this time around. Let's check in, though, with our host of Locked On Florida Panthers and see what Armando Valez has to say.
The Stanley Cup Final has officially shifted to South Florida. What is up, guys? Armando Valez here from the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, here to quickly preview Game 3 of the Stanley Cup Final between the Panthers and the Oilers, where the winner of Game 3 has a 69% chance of winning the series in NHL history. And the Panthers are expected to roll the same lineup from Games 1 and 2 into Game 3, while there's a question on the other side for the Oilers. All the D pairs have been mixed up in Sunday's practice, and there's a question for whether Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is going to suit up. And the Panthers have been able to pounce in Game 2 against the top dogs of the Oilers, especially when Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl were on the ice together. And for the Panthers, they find themselves in this position despite Barkov, Reinhart, and Tkachuk not finding that extra gear just yet. No power play goals in the playoffs for Sam Reinhart. Barkov is a -4 so far in this series. We'll break all this down and more on tomorrow's Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
All right, and thanks to Armando Valez for that report. Hope you guys are checking out both Locked On Oilers and Locked On Florida Panthers to get all the latest on those teams. Quick injury news for the Panthers. Aaron Ekblad took the shot off his hand in game number 2, was in obvious pain. After the game, head coach Paul Maurice said he would be fine, and he was apparently in practice. Didn't look like he was limited in any way. So Aaron Ekblad looks like he's good to go for game number 3. So fortunately for the Florida Panthers, they seem to be completely healthy. But Armando brought it up, and I think the Panthers have to consider themselves somewhat fortunate in that they've been in both these games. They've won one of them on the road, and yet their top line has the same number of goals as you and me in these finals, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Alexander Barkov, Sam Reinhart, Carter Verhaeghe have no goals. Now, Verhaeghe does have 3 assists. Barkov and Reinhart have yet to get a point. And you may say, well, these are 2 Selke Trophy finalists this year. Barkov won it, and Reinhart was runner-up. So I'm sure that they're, focusing on the defensive side of things. Well, they're a combined -7 so far in the first 2 games. So if I'm Florida, I'm thinking, you know what? I might feel pretty good that we're 1-1 coming home, and 2 of my better players in Barkov and Reinhart haven't kind of showed up yet.
That is good news and bad news. I'm going to tell you why. Good news because you know that at any given point, they can just go off just like that. With the caliber of players that they are, it's almost as if that they are a sleeping giant, if you will, between Barkov and Sam Reinhart. They're sleeping giants. Bad news, if this goes any further than Monday night's game 3, I think offensively, the Florida Panthers are in trouble. They're not winning the Stanley Cup unless Reinhart and Barkov get going offensively. Yes, they have been, providing points in terms of the assists and whatnot, but you need a lot more offensive punch than just relying on guys. Let's say, for example, Sam Bennett or Brad Marchand, who combined so far this postseason have more than 20 goals combined between the both players. You need more from your other players, as I mentioned, Reinhart and Barkov, if they're going to win the cup. So if you're Florida Panthers, the good news is you know what they're capable of. They can just suddenly wake up like a dormant volcano at any given point. The bad news is you got to give credit where it's due to Edmonton in terms of limiting on their chance in terms of putting the puck in the back of the net. But you need them to finally wake up offensively and get going if, in fact, Florida is going to take control of this series, because the truth is this series has been so airtight that it is extremely difficult to say that one team has had the edge over the other, even though I did say on the other episode that Edmonton by a slim hair, but the reality is it's been just about even.
Well, for the Panthers, they're probably not too disappointed that it's been quiet for them going into game 3. There's no injury news. There's no lineup changes at all. The only news, and we were looking for something from the Panthers, was that Brad Marchand on Sunday said that he would be open to returning to the Panthers next season. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent after this season. He also said he is only focused on, obviously, the finals right now, but he did mention that he would be open to coming back to the Florida Panthers next season. And why not? I mean, this is a team that's been to the Stanley Cup Finals 3 years in a row. They've won it last year. It's a great team. He's clearly has fit in very well there. So if he's being honest, I have no reason to think he's not. Brad Marchand may not be testing free agency, looking to maybe stay with the Florida Panthers next season.
Which even as a Bruins fan, it wouldn't surprise me if he does. But also on that point, Eddie, keep in mind, he also did an interview with Elliot Friedman of the NHL and Sportsnet and Hockey Night in Canada, where he specifically told him, listen, I'm open to entertain like the option. I'm just paraphrasing on what he said. But also, when asked by Elliot Friedman, he did ask him, listen, it's Hockey Night in Canada, or is there a chance that you would ever play for a Canadian team? And Brad Marchand basically said, listen, I'm anything's possible. I'm not going to rule it out. But right now, my focus is on the Stanley Cup Finals. So to your point, I do think that at this point, come July 1st, anything's possible with Brad Marchand. But it really would not surprise me if he stayed with the Florida Panthers, considering how well he's fit there, how well he's integrated himself into the culture down in Sunrise, but then also seeing what he's been able to do during these Stanley Cup playoffs and the opportunity he now has that he did not have before when he was with the Boston Bruins.
All right, the Stanley Cup Finals are tied at 1-1. We are all excited to see what Game 3 has in store. Make sure you join our teammates, Cam Stewart and Tyra Feldman, who will be recapping all the action from Game 3 after the conclusion of the game. Shu and I will be back on Thursday to recap game number 4. I'm Eddie Garcia. He's Shukri Wrights. Thanks for listening and watching Locked On NHL Game Night, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day.